Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode number 1 of the Unordinary Perspective podcast. My name is Aaron, and we're going to process through a couple of topics of hypocrisy going on in our state legislature on day number 3 of their 2023 session. I feel like we're going to be talking about hypocrisy a lot because that is the partisan divided nature of our legislature, isn't it? I mean, there is so much intellectual dishonesty in some of the bills that are being pushed. And this has been pervasive for the past few years, so this is nothing new. But something that particularly caught my eye as I was just scrolling through the bills that had been introduced and which ones are being referred to different committees and all of that, I saw 2 bills that are directly competing with each other on a logical basis. At least in some capacity. We'll dive into it. But they're supported by the same person. Senator Hunt is a sponsor on both of these bills, and I can't understand how the same person argues for one of these bills and the other while maintaining any sort of integrity. I can't process it because it doesn't make sense. It's completely illogical. All right, so Senate Bill 5082, that would eliminate advisory votes on tax increases that were produced by the state legislature. The next is Senate Bill 5209 that would make voting a compulsory duty, just like selective service, just like jury duty, like it would force people into it if the government calls you to do it. And in this case, this particular bill would also call for the requirement that you will cast a ballot. So what this does, voting is a compulsory duty. It requires voter registration of everyone over 18. It requires ballot distribution by mail, and it requires people to return a ballot. Now, there's an option in there to get a waiver for it, but that's not the point. They're trying to force people to vote while eliminating advisory votes on taxes. That's funny. All right, so the advisory vote bill. I want to talk a little bit about that. What's my issue with it? Number one, it undermines the will of the people. I'll unpack that in a second. But more obvious, it eliminates a recorded vote of the people. Now, something important to note, an advisory vote is a non-binding vote. In our state, the state legislature has the power to impose taxes. That means we cannot force the legislature to take an action in an advisory capacity. It's an advisory vote. I think that word is pretty self-explanatory. It's advisory to the legislature. Okay, simple enough. I'm pretty sure everyone understands that. It's an advisory vote. It's non-binding. The legislature doesn't have to take action. That mechanism in our state was imposed in 2007 by Initiative 960. Now, an initiative is a citizen-driven bill. The legislature didn't enact it. We, the voters, went out and gathered signatures on petitions to say, we want this. We want this to be on our ballot so we can vote on it. We want to install this as law. So a citizen wrote the bill. Granted, Tim Eyman wrote the bill. And I think that's why a lot of people are ticked off about this particular one and why it's become such a politically divisive topic, because it was installed by an initiative that Tim Eyman started. Okay, well, whatever. It was funny. Yesterday, I testified before the Senate. I forget which committee it was, but it was on state government and elections in the Senate. And I testified before them. And I was listening to the prime sponsor, Senator Cooter. I'm always concerned about pronouncing her last name. But I was listening to her give her bullet points on why this bill is so important. And just the toxic... just the stuff that she was saying was so off-putting, because it was like this thing that we do in our state, the advisory votes, they are fraud. She literally called them fraud. um, and a few other things that I could not get myself to pass logically. I couldn't understand them. Is basically trying to completely devalue what these do, as if they are a complete waste of time. They're a waste of our money. They're a waste of resources because they don't do a damn thing. They're not important. And everything was undertoned in what she was saying. And the people who are coming in to testify in support of the Senate bill that would repeal the requirement for advisory votes, everything these people were saying, it was rooted in the same underlying tone that the voters are stupid. They don't want this, even though we voted to impose it. It was almost comical, but it definitely got me more frustrated than it did make me laugh. But anyways, I testified on that subject, and I couldn't help but just stop myself and pause for a minute and just be like, I started out my testimony by saying, like, look, I'm going to slow down. We, like, the voters are not stupid. No one said that, but it felt like just the underlying push, the one motivating thing that's like, the voters are stupid. They're being duped. They're being manipulated because the language in the law is so biased and puts out that, the legislature passed without a vote of the people this tax increase. Well, yeah, as if it's a negative thing, because, well, yeah, it is a negative thing. The legislature in our state has continued to pass tax after tax after tax increase year after year after year. Since 2012, there have been 40 bills. 40 bills to increase taxes. 40 line items. You know what? Let me open this up and read them off real quick. I mean, it's insane. Vote number 1, omnibus tax preference. Don't know the details of that. Pollution liability insurance. A tax on leasehold excise tax. A tax on aircraft excise tax. An insurance premium tax, a retail sales tax exemption, an estate tax, an agricultural tax on marijuana, a leasehold excise tax, an oil spill prevention tax, a medicinal marijuana fee. It's a tax. Gas tax increase, manufacturer tax preferences, dental plan tax, alternative fuel tax exemption, commercial fishing fees, tax, business and occupation tax, sales property tax, crude oil tax, tax on wages, surcharge on timber products, tax on timber products, paint tax, e-cig and vaping product tax, business activities tax, financial institution tax, online retail sales tax, petroleum sales tax, non-resident sales tax exemption limits, excise tax on real property, tour operating or travel agent tax, international investment management services tax, carry-out bag tax, heavy equipment rental tax, business and occupation tax on and surcharge, business and occupation tax on commercial airplane manufacturers, telephone tax to fund behavioral health and suicide prevention services, tax on capital gains above $250,000 to fund education and child services. Oh, that's a big one. That was voted to be denied in the advisory vote by 61%. Just a few more. Tax on the premiums of captive insurers, tax on aircraft fuel, and finally, the last one, tax on transportation network companies. 40 tax increases. 40 since 2012. Oh my God. This last year, our state operated with a $15 billion surplus. Our state is not operating with tax revenue problems. So why in the hell do we continue to allow our legislature to pass these on? It's absolutely insane to me that people would try to pass a bill that eliminates the advisory vote on the basis that it does nothing. Yeah, this is a political move. It's to get people less pissed off with you. The reason people probably are frustrated with the advisory vote. I mean, here, I'm going to back up just a second. I don't remember what lobbying group it was that was testifying yesterday in support of this. They came out of the gate were the first ones to testify. And a big topic that they were bringing up was this scientific poll, this scientific study that they had done to get the opinions of Washington voters on this advisory vote system, and how their conclusion was voters in Washington state do not want these advisory votes. They are upset with it and they don't want the advisory votes. They're dissatisfied. Okay. Have we considered that dissatisfaction may actually be with the taxes that are imposed and the fact that we don't have a choice in it rather than the actual vote itself? Like, that couldn't possibly be a thing, could it? Oh, our state is continuing to take action to force us to give more of our earned money to them, to be mismanaged, to be spent in ways that many of us don't support. And I get that there's a lot of opinions on taxes and publicly funded things, okay? I'll get into my personal belief on taxes in another episode. This is not the time for that. The point here is that the advisory vote is to show what these lobby groups were trying to prove through their scientific studies. Okay, you don't need a scientific study to get the people's opinion on this. Put it to a vote. In addition to the initiative perspective of self-legislating, we also have the power to a referendum. There are two ways a referendum can be started. Real quick, let's cover what referendum is. A referendum is when there has been an action that the legislature takes, and we, the people, get to vote on it and have our vote count on it. That's what a referendum is. And there are two ways to start it. Either we, the voters, can go get a petition and gather signatures to say, hey, this bill that they did, that this thing, we want to vote on it. Will you support calling this to our ballot? We can gather signatures to call it to our ballot. The legislature can also initiate that. The legislature has the power to pass an amendment to the bill that says this will be a referenda to the people, and the people will vote on it, not us. So the legislature starts it and says, we're going to give this to the people to decide. All right. So the intellectually honest thing to do with this Senate bill would be to make it a referenda. Instead of trying to just push it on to the rest of the chamber and say, oh, the people don't want this. We've gathered data. We know this is frustrating, blah, blah, blah. Put it to a vote. Prove yourself right. Prove me wrong. That would settle everything about that debate. So instead of wasting time debating about whether to take a vote away from us, why don't you give us the vote and let us choose whether we want to continue to have an advisory vote on taxes? What a thought. Anyways, let's move on to the next Senate bill, and we'll talk about the issue between the two in a moment. Senate Bill 5209 and mandatory voting. So what's my issue with this one? Well, number one, it doesn't address the cause of low voter turnout. It's also not prudent, and it's grossly hypocritical. On one hand, I appreciate the idea of having everyone vote, but on the other, I know that it's impossible to force people to engage a system that they believe is broken and pitted against them. That's the big topic. I'm not convinced that it is a good thing to ask people to vote. No, sorry, not ask, require. I don't believe it's a good thing to require people to vote on something when they don't care about the consequences of their vote. That's insane. You will have people who don't care and who don't know the consequences voting on stuff. That is what will happen. That seems insane to me. But in addition to it, for this bill to be pushed by Senator Hunt, while he also says, yeah, but not on tax advisories. That is so just logically ass backward. It's incredible to me. Look, the lack of voting in our state, I firmly believe, is rooted in a lack of motivation in the voters, a lack of care from the voters. It's not about a lack of access. People don't need to be required to vote. The reason they don't vote is because they don't believe it makes a difference anyways, which is really ironic because it's this type of action by our legislature that says, oh, well, they don't get to decide that anyways. We're going to take that away from them. Excuse me. It's that kind of action, this kind of critical, hypocritical action that demotivates and devalues people's willingness to vote anyways. Because I'm telling you what, the people who don't vote, man, their ballot comes in the mailbox. Hang on. Coco! Dog barking. Wonderful. Look, people who don't vote, their ballots are found in the mailbox with their voter pamphlet, and it finds the garbage can before they even walk back in the house. Okay? Requiring people to vote, I am absolutely sure it would cause more people to turn out just because of the appeal to authority. The appeal to authority works. And people will show up to vote more. I know that. Very confident in that. But oh my gosh, what a mess. I just can't believe the logical inconsistency and the intellectual dishonesty with pushing both of these in the same session by the same person. It's wild to me. And I have to wonder if some of this is rooted in the fact that if we get more people to turn up as a result of a requirement being put in place, I wonder if that advisory vote now would all of a sudden become a stable argument to have in court. Because, it's one thing if we have like a 50% voter turnout. So 50% of the people show up and those 50% have a divided opinion. So it's like 25, 26% of the people making a decision, like 25 or 26% of the voters making a decision because they had a majority of the 50% who showed up. But what if like 80% of the voters showed up and they looked at an advisory vote and said like, nope, we do not want that. And the advisory vote was rejected by 70% of the people who showed up. Okay, numerically, that would equate to 56% of the registered voters in that 80-70 scenario. That would be pretty solid ground to go to court and be like, you lost the consent of the governed on that particular issue. The consent of the governed is a constitutional topic. At least in our state, it's very clearly, explicitly the leading thing before all else in our state government. That is Article 1, Section 1 of our state constitution. It says that all political power is inherent in the people, and governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed and are established to protect and maintain individual rights. That is the opening statement in our state constitution, below the preamble that says we are created by God and we have been given powers to self-regulate, that little bit. God, voters, government. The power and the voice of the people comes before the legislature. It comes before the government. These people whose job it is to make legislation understand that hierarchy of power. They understand it. Excuse me. So in some capacity, it doesn't surprise me. Hang on. Sorry about that. So in some capacity, it doesn't surprise me at all that we would have these two bills introduced at the same time, because that's a really valid point that we could go to court for and say, like, no, more than 50% of the voters advised that they would repeal a tax increase that you, the legislature, passed. Therefore, it does not carry the consent of the governed. Therefore, it is not constitutional and it is null and void. I could see that argument playing out, maybe not in our biased courts, but any logical court that gives a damn about integrity. That's a viable argument. In a scenario where more than 50% of the voters reject something in an advisory capacity, very likely if we force more people to show up and vote. Because, hell, even the people who don't care much about casting a ballot, even those who aren't like super up to date with the current activities of the government and all that's going on, they can see that, oh, you passed a tax on my weed eater? You passed a tax to buy plastic materials? You passed a tax on bags for my groceries? Screw that. No. Again, 75% of the advisory votes that have been passed were rejected. 75%. These people in our government are smart. They know what they're doing. They know how to build up a legal case, and they know how to retain power. That is what this is about. It is about advancing whatever agenda that the party, the one leading party in our state, decides is important, and they are going to get it whether we like it or not. They've proven that to be true. And the only way that we can actually fight against that and cause some sort of positive change in this environment is by people getting involved. It's by you and me speaking up, contacting our representatives, contacting our senator, providing testimony, giving them phone calls, sending them emails, and by helping other people understand the things that are going on in our state that need to be fought against. Because almost all of this is principle-based. Almost all of it. Especially when you are coming from a conservative perspective or a small government point of view. Because that is where I lean. I lean conservative. I lean libertarian in a lot of ways. But I lean small government. I'm not anarchist. I'm small government oriented. And in our state, it is very, very difficult to have a voice and believe that what you're doing makes a difference, because the Democratic Party has ruled in our state for decades, in both chambers of the legislature, in all of the executive offices with the exception of the Secretary of State, until a couple years ago. And now all of the elected bureaucratic heads in the executive branch are Democrat as well. Like, we are a deep blue state. And again, going back to the whole topic of the consent of the governed and our structure of government here, like, we do not have a democracy. We are not a democracy. We have a constitutional, representative republic that has some democratic functions built in to the representation and into some decision-making on our ballots. But everything else is by representation. And until people truly understand that difference, and they truly get that we, via the Constitution, empowered representatives to make law and make policy for all of us, they are the ones who you need to be caring about. It's not the president. It's not the governor. You need to be caring about who represents you. They are the ones who have power in our government. The ones who have the power to set law, change law, delete law, and make requirements for the executive offices to execute. Our problems are grossly rooted in people's lack of care for our governing systems. And yes, it's easy to get demoralized and demotivated in the system when we recognize that individually we have very little power, but collectively we inherently have all of the power. We have to remember that. You have to remember that when you address your representatives, because there's a way you can be respectful and polite and still carry yourself knowing that, no, I am in the group that actually controls what this body does. Like it's not the other way around here. And there will always be a tension in that and a power struggle in that. There will always be that. I don't know that there's a way to mitigate that. But the way to hold health is in the tension in the middle. I love that reality. The tension is what holds a healthy relationship. And when tension breaks and the pendulum gets unbalanced, that is when unhealth exists in this system. The same thing is true in private organizations and in families and in government. Tension is a healthy thing if you can conduct yourself in a healthy, balanced way. All right. Anyways, I'm going to wrap up episode 1. That is it. I would highly encourage you to reach out to your representatives. If you don't know who your representatives or your senator is, visit ledge.wa.gov. And let me expand this so we can actually see. On the navigation on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see a navigation bar. Go down until you see Find Your District. You click on that. It'll ask you for your address and zip code. Hit Find My District, and it'll show you the names of your 2 representatives and the name of your state senator. Go do that. Get their email addresses into your phones. Get them into your address book and start communicating with them. Excuse me, my goodness. Start communicating with them regularly, please. This is good for all of us. It's good for you. It's good for them. And lastly, I will encourage you, please go comment on Senate Bill 5082 that would eliminate advisory votes. Tell your representatives or your senator what you want to see with advisory votes. Tell them if you want them to stay in place or if you don't want them anymore. And Senate Bill 5209 that would make voting a requirement. Please go share your opinion on that as well. Become involved. Follow the Unordinary Perspective podcast if you would like more information during this legislative session and to hear me rant and process some of these topics openly. I'm hoping that you can gain some good perspective in what we're talking about here. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, things you want to talk about, please either send me an email, send me a message, leave them in the comments below. Let's process some of this stuff and actually talk about things that matter and that need to be worked through. Until next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your week. If you're just starting, good for you. If you're just wrapping it up, I hope you have a good weekend. I'll talk to y'all soon.